Okay. Um, wow. I love how this is how we start. So I originally wasn't gonna post today, since yesterday and today are the days that I'm supposed to be hunting to get things. I was hoping to find at least two yesterday and two today. Um, I'm still reading the second one. I'm okay, I'm most definitely gonna ask, and I think I'll get permission for this one for a fact. The other one I asked for, though, I'm still waiting on a response. And another series I asked for, I'm waiting on a response. So I have two more series to find to ask for. But I did just get permission for this one shot, so I thought, fuck it, we're gonna read it. I want to thank Okay, I am about to murder this name because I have no idea how it's said. Thank you to Phantom Angel? Maybe? Phantom Angel? Maybe? Please tell me if I butchered that, please. I'm so sorry. Um, but yeah, I just got permission for this, so thought might as well record it. And thank you to the author for letting me podfic it. Let me get on to the tags and all that. I do want to say thank you to the person that actually sent a recommendation. I actually read it and went to ask. It's a little one shot, so we'll see if I get permission for that. You could go check out my posts and scroll down a little bit to find the post for recommendations. Please send recommendations there because it's easier to find them and I don't have to go hunting. Thank you. Anyway, let me get to the tags. This is Teen Up Audience, Jen. The only relationship is just Zawa and Midoriya, friends. No ships. No ships. Eraserhead and Midoriya are the characters. And the additional tags: Parental Azawa Shota, Eraserhead, Dadzawa, tying a tie. Midoriya Azuku is a ray of sunshine. Midoriya Azuku needs a hug. Azawa cares, but he's bad at showing it. No beta, we die like men. Dad Drabble. Renewed. Midoriya Azuku needs a dad. Azawa Shota is willing to step in. Fluff and angst. Midoriya Zuku is bad at feelings. Azawa Shota, or Eraserhead, is bad at feelings, but he's trying. And pretty perspective. Wardrobe issues. Ties and carvants? What's a carvant, people? Please somebody tell me what that is. I don't want to look it up right now. Midoriya Zuku has trust issues. Midoriya Zuku has one for all. Midoriya Zuku asks a lot of questions. Azawa tries to answer. This is a one-shot. It does have a series that I just noticed existed. Let me see. I don't think this is like a series. Yeah, no, it's not a series. That's why. It's like a bunch of dad fics. Let me read the name and summary again. Loose Ends by phantomessangel. That's how I'm gonna say it for now. Summary. It took almost Today is the day. It only took a month before Shota cracked. A month of staring at the monstrosity around Problem Child's neck. Jarbled and knotted and wrinkled in the most bizarre way. It didn't even resemble a tie anymore, which was a feat. Only a month before, Shota called the boy's attention to fix the blasted thing. God damn it. Okay, let's get on to the story. Problem Child. Azuka Midoriya startled, biting back a squawk of surprise as his teacher's voice cut through the silent classroom. The boy's feet jerked awkwardly out towards, kicking the desk in front of him. A hard twing echoed like a bell in the child's ears. Damn it. Azuka had come back to the classroom early after lunch to finish up a few last minute details in his analysis notebook. There'd been a fight earlier that morning on the way to school. And even though he'd only gotten a few glimpses of the action, the boy couldn't get the memory out of his head. It'd been All Might. He'd been out there, fighting, using his power, or what's left of it anyway, and several other newer heroes were acting as backup in case the number one needed them. Not that he did. This was All Might we were talking about, but still. Azuku had counted 4 other heroes there, waiting to jump into the battle. And so Azuku had been buzzing, determined to capture the image, unable to really let them go until they were sketched out in his book for analysis. Which is why he was here before class started up again for the afternoon schedule. His eaten lunch and his sketchbook in hand, he wanted to finalize a few of the details he'd been replaying all morning. The things he'd admire about All Might's abilities, the things he'd figured he could use in his own training, and Azuku had figured that he could just sketch here. And the emptiness and the quiet of the classroom. No one ever came here. No one ever really wanted to. Azuku would know. He spent a lot of time in here when people were just too loud and he felt too out of place in the school itself. It always been a nice break, a calm place to escape from others. He hadn't expected to run into anyone, least of all his teacher. And yet here the man stood, as Izuku lifted his head to confirm, as his teacher sighed. And yes, it really was Azawa Sensei, standing there with his bright yellow sleeping bag folded over one arm and a firm scowl painted on his face, as he eyed Izuku thoughtfully, maybe judging him. And oh god, what had Izuku done? The boy could feel the way his palms were already warm and sweaty. As the boy lifted his eyes and straightened his position to peer towards his teacher. We need to talk. And oh god. Those 4 words sent warning bells ringing in Azuku's ears, and the room suddenly felt 10 times smaller, each noise growing louder as Azuku Sensei stared at him expectantly. Expectantly. The man's face was pulled into a frown, pitch-colored gaze trained on the boy as he peered down his nose at Izuku. Expectant. As in, he wanted a response of some kind. And Izuku didn't know what to say or how to say it. He didn't know. He didn't know what his sensei even wanted. But he knew that it was something that Izuku wouldn't like. Judging by the man's expression and the way he stood at the front of the room, near his desk and well away from Izuku. It was like Azawa Sensei knew to keep away from Izuku, because what he was going to say was something Izuku probably feared. Dreaded, maybe? That's stupid, though, the boy chastised himself, trying to quash the thoughts as quickly as they wafted through his senses and trickled through his brain. You can't know. But maybe. It was unusual like that, right? Oh god. The boy tightened his grip on his pencil, peering up with wide eyes at his homeroom teacher. He didn't want it to be like that, though. He didn't want to think the worst. Izuku didn't want to suspect that this could be the end of all things, or that his sensei was angry at him for something. Something that he didn't say, or something that he didn't do, or something you didn't deserve. Right, Izuku? Yeah, like that. What if it is about one for all? His thoughts spewed out theories, worried and anxious addled, as he tried to stop his bouncing legs and his trembling arms from going noticed by the others. Well, other really. Just his sensei was here, in the room with him, standing still, still waiting, still staring at him expectantly, hopefully. But what if he does notice? Oh no, oh no, oh no, no, no. That tie is an abomination, problem child. It's time we fix it. We fixed it. Azuka's eyes widened, his spiraling thoughts screeching to a halt. With a hard slam. It's such a quick ending that the boy was caught completely off guard by what happened and what had just been said to him. What his The doom thinking and agitated speculating was upended, and the cogs in the boy's brain struggled to turn once again. As Izuku only blinked back at his teacher, completely incapable of comprehending what had just been said to him and why the hell it actually mattered. His what? There was another beat of silence, a weight settling awkwardly between them as as Zuko's teacher leaned lightly on his desk, hands resting on the carefully lat as he tilted his head in questioning towards the boy. Azawa Sensei furrowed his brow at the boy's silence, onyx orbs searching Izuku's face as he waited for the child to answer. And when he didn't, the man only hummed softly and shook his head, gaze flashing with a questioning flicker. What did you think I was going to say? Oh, Azuku balked at the question and the soft demand for honesty that his sensei was seeking, clearly aware that Izuku's thoughts were somewhere far, far away from thinking about ties and their messiness and whatever it was that Azawa Sensei had said about the way that Izuku's looked. Abomination or something like that. N- nothing, the boy hastily replied, unwilling to admit that to his fears and agree to be completely honest with his sensei just yet, even though part of him was kicking himself for doing that, lying so easily, so casually, so quickly. I was just confused. A wave of guilt lapped at his senses as he tried to quell the thoughts that swished and swamped him. The dreaded idea that the man had finally figured out things about his quirk, about All Might, about any of it. The fact that he was too scared to trust the man that had saved him not too long ago. And here Izuku was, lying to him about the truth. But I'm trying to protect them, he justified, pushing his shame down, trying to swallow the bile back as he forced a half-hearted smile on his face. I'm trying to do the right thing. Right? It was the right thing, wasn't it? But, what's wrong with my tie, Sensei? Izuku changed the subject back to the original comment, trying to keep the darker thoughts at bay for now. I don't see anything. I I don't think there's anything that bad. Is there? Again, Izuku was lying, and he knew he was. Izuku knew damn well what was wrong with his tie, as his hands as his hand carefully reached up and tugged near the knot. He thought it looked nice, though, didn't it? He earned an eye roll from his teacher for his quip as he straightened and huffed. Gray capture weapons swishing lightly around his shoulders as the man held out his hand in expectation. I won't even del- that. I won't even delight that with a response. Azawa deadpanned, giving a response anyway, as he gently gestured with his fingers that Azuku started moving. Now, hand me that thing. Let's get this over with. Again, all Azuku could do for a minute was blink in surprise. What? Nothing was going to plan, and Choda was left feeling equal parts flux-moxed and concerned at how everything was unfolding. And really, why had he decided to do this again? So I turned this bit around the back and then up and through. Problem's child's face was scrunched up in concentration, Viridian eyes laser focused on the task at hand as skilled and unsteady fingers attempted, once again, to move the loose ends of the red together into a perfect knot, shaking and twisting in the wrong direction, moving over and then backwards resulted in a haphazard noose that didn't resemble what the man had taught the boy at all, as the child continued to mutter to himself, twisting and untwisting the material around his neck. Oh, but that's not right at all. Maybe I did it backwards? He had. But if I undo that bit, then it'll take the shorter end and make it too long. And yes, it would. So how do I make the front end longer and put it together, the top, like you said, but without it going into a big ball? Well, maybe if I just pull this here, and there was another turn in the material, another soft tucking and a pull through, and really, how the hell could he have messed things up that badly? Shota shook his head disapprovingly and reached forward once more. Not quite, problem child, he murmured patiently, his confusion mixed with with a determination to teach this skill, because the kid needed to know it. You have it backwards. Start with the opposite side of the fabric. The wider end needs to fall on the outside when you're done. So you'll need to use that as the loop for the top of the knot, where it sits at your throat, not the shorter bit. There was a soft oh that whispered through the air as Izuku nodded his head after a moment, his gaze trained on the tie in his sensei's hands. As he studied the fabric, the boy's ears had turned a soft shade of pink. As he tipped his gaze downward, away from Shota's face. Sorry. It's nothing to be sorry for, the man remarked easily, trying to help the kid understand. This was just a simple skill, one that Shota had learned a long time ago, and needed Problem Child to understand. Though he still wasn't sure why it was his job to do it. Why he needed or felt he needed to do this. Though oddly he did. Not that it mattered right now to consider. It wasn't so important. Not really. Let's go through this again. Should have grasped either end of the fiery red tie together, pulling them outwards, outward in demonstration, his movements slow and methodical to allow Problem Child to follow along with his movements as he turned each end of the tie together into the first knot. This one, the man's thoughts shimmered calmly as he adjusted the material again, going for the second round, turning the same end and fastening section around the back and out through the top of the neck loop to face the front. That's two. And then folding and turning the fatter end over the skinnier section once more, Shota created a small sideways loop that covered over the first two knots and held open the space between the no and his loop with his hand before carefully taking the end of the outer section of the tie and turning it underneath and beneath the knotting around the boy's neck. One more. The man's voice was even, thoughtfully, as he carefully tugged the material upwards before tugging it down through the opening he created with his hand, pulling downwards to complete the smooth circle and easing the end through the loop. Oh! Midoriya's voice was brighter than it had been a moment ago, as a spark of recognition trickled through his timbre. Which was good, Shota decided, almost wryly, as he released the two ends of the tie into the boy's care once more. He watched the boy's scarred hand fumble and fiddle with the silk material, undoing the knots entirely to start the process over. I start here with one knot over. The boy's voice wavered, his lips puckered in a way in as he narrowed bottle green eyes and concentrated on his task. And then I pull this through and do the same thing this way, but leave it underneath. Shota had to admit that the kid was a quick study, and as he maneuvered through each one of the man's instructions with careful precision, it really was a testament to the boy's quick thinking and keen eye. A dark gaze flickered towards the forgotten notebook on the desk a few feet away as Shota stewed, always sketching away in that thing. The assessment was swift but precise, brought about from countless hours of studying the boy's behavior. And then I wrapped the thin end around one more time before pulling it underneath. The kid received a nod of affirmation, which seemed to encourage him, beaming up at Shota. Why did that do a funny thing to his chest? Problem Child turned his attention back to the tie, carefully situating the material around and through, tightening the newly tied material smartly against the other collar of his uniform shirt. And now the material looked far more like a tie than it ever had before. Situated as it was now, the boy carefully smoothed the invisible wrinkles that had been tugged and eased away through Shota's repeated demonstrations. Long, jagged scars caught the man's attention as shaking fingers fiddled to position the crimson to perfection, and the man couldn't help the odd thoughts that crept up the idea of that this boy seemed different in more ways than one, self-assured and yet not, which didn't make sense to the man given what he knew of the boy, which admittedly wasn't a lot. At least not enough to really get an inside look into the child's life. and his world prior to UA, and understand those driving thoughts that provoked those odd actions, words, and quiet retreats into himself when he thought he was alone, like he'd been here in the classroom. Midoriya's face split into a satisfied grin as his nose twitched, Freckles' cheeks wrinkling as the smile broadened as he tapped the tie lightly with his pointer before flicking his gaze upward to meet his sensei's, seeking approval. And Shota gave it easily. This time around, his this seventh, or was it eighth attempt, had been far better than the last, and he admitted the kid's handiwork as well. It's better. The man's voice rumbled softly in his chest as he tilted his face into his capture weapon, studying the boy's careful knots, grateful that if this kid practiced a few more times, he wouldn't have to look at that monstrosity of a tie job the boy'd been sporting the last several weeks. What an eyesore it had been. And it had only taken a month before Shota cracked. A month of staring at the monstrosity around Problem Child's neck, durable and knotted and wrinkled in the most bizarre way. It didn't resemble a tie anymore, which was a feat. Only a month before Shota called to the boy to attention to fix the blasted thing. God damn it. And really, a month was quite a long time by Shota standards. If he were being honest, it was a month too long, in his opinion. A month of staring and watching and assessing, wondering if the damn thing would ever be fixed. If he'd ever seen progress on the tie front. A month of wondering why the hell he ever really cared about the tie in the first place. The man shook his head and let the thoughts slip away. It was a useless endeavor to stew on right now. Fingers tapped lightly against his thigh as the exhausted teacher blinked and rolled his shoulders. Right. You made a lot of progress. Good job. Shota admitted quietly with a nod, standing with a stiff shuffle as he changed his thoughts and the subject. The man tried to ignore the way the boy's eyes widened at the compliment, shock swishing in that deep green gaze, before the kid tamped down his emotion and quickly swallowed, which irked the man to think that the boy should be surprised to receive a compliment for something so trite. Why would he be shocked? Why surprised at receiving a compliment of any kind? But Shota also noted the hesitant "thank you" Midoriya choked out, filled with far more emotion than he had guessed possible, and a second peek back towards Problem Child gave the vestige of the boy's face. Eyes were shining and misty, embarrassment coloring freckled cheeks. He wasn't good at hiding all his emotions, it seemed. The man cleared his throat. Now practice that 2 more times to make sure you can do it on your own, he retorted gruffly, though not unkindly, as he tried to stifle the awkwardness of the moment with a push forward to something productive. Had the had to keep the momentum going, right? Right. The child's voice cracked as he nodded hastily, and returned to his mission, the notebook still lying inconspicuously on the desk, forgotten for the moment, in favor of the present, the conversation, the current task, which was probably the healthier option for the kid, Shota supposed. Focus on what you can see in front of you now, problem child. The boy's homeroom teacher slowly moved through the row of desks and back to his own seat, pulling out a jelly packet from the top drawer, gaze briefly drifting back to the hyper-focused teen who unraveled his tie and was making slow work of trying it once more. Brows were furrowed again, eyes narrowed, and with a deep frown pulling at the normally smiling face. Midoriya's fingers continued to tremble, a constant issue that seemed to plague him, though his movements in coiling the material around seemed steady enough. Delicate wrapping of crimson silk slipping through stumbling fingers. Shota supposed that trembling would always be there in the boy's hands. Maybe it had been there before he hurt himself in the sports festival too. The man couldn't be sure. He'd never taken the time to really look and understand. Study the situation and the child until now, that is. And sitting, he could see that the tremor that shook fingers and worked into the boy's palm, up the wrist. A constant pain, perhaps. A constant issue that he'd have to pay more mind to. I'll have to make a note, he mused idly, turning to brief glance to the time and letting out a silent groan as his own tremble of exhaustion flickered in protest to the realization. There wasn't enough of the lunch hour left to get a proper nap in. Figured. Still, the man turned back to the boy briefly, watching the progress for a moment more, as the sense of annoyance at losing his napping opportunity waned. The taste of apple tripped down his throat as he inhaled his jelly pack. And stewed thoughts flickering between ideas, theories, considerations. As he watched for another moment more before he adjusted back to his own present, and took his advice to stay on task, much like he admonished the boy to do. Well, he supposed he could get some grading done in silence. Lacquered fingers reached for a small stack of exams sitting at the corner of his desk. Blue pen ticked neatly next to it, a timer placed on the other end, waiting for his attention. With a 10-minute deadline for each exam, each essay, each grading component. Shota reached out and dialed the electronic timer to appropriate timing. As he reached his Ashio's exam in his pen, for once it seemed the boy wasn't keen on asking any questions, which was odd, but he'd at least do what he could while the time allowed. Sensei, can I ask who, uh, who taught you, uh, to, uh, to tie a tie? Never mind. With a long, suffering sigh, because he should have realized that was bound to happen, should have set his pen down and peered into the wide, inquiring gaze of the boy who held his tie in each hand, temporarily abandoning his task in favor of harassing his teacher. Typical problem child behavior. Shota really should have just given up on trying to do anything and simply waited for the boy to ask the questions he'd inevitably would have had. He knew the kid well enough to know they were coming. He should have just waited. And Shota, who fringed mid and mild annoyance, found that he wasn't so bothered to address the questions and avoid his own grading task. As he lifted his eyes to meet the boy's face more fully, watching the hesitant worry flicker again in the boy's face as he waited for sensei to answer. And why worry? Odd, his mind whispered, rifling that thought away for analysis later, when he could think more clearly on the moment, instead of addressing the boy's question here and in the present, because that was more important. Hazashi, the man's soft, simple reply. Insisted on it, actually. And much to Shota's surprise, the kid's gaze widened further. Shock renewed his gaze as he straightened and leaned forward at the desk that he'd been sitting at. Not not your dad? Ah. Answer clicked, slipping easily into place that with a simple reply. The wide-eyed question from the tentative voice of the boy in front of him. And it really should have been obvious sooner for Shota. He should have seen the signs before and realized why the boy was asking the question, and why it mattered so damn much for the kid to understand the answer to it. And Shota was an idiot, it seemed, because he hadn't caught on. He hadn't understood. For as obvious as Izuku Midoriya could be, he could also be rather vague, closed off and aloof when he chose. Again, it made no sense, not one bit. Nevertheless, answer the question, Sho. The man shook his head lightly and set his hands carefully on his desk. Grading was a lost cause. It wasn't so important anyway. He hated grading papers and assigning numbers and values to students he could just assess by watching their progress. No, the man remarked carefully, threading his fingers together as he appraised the boy's posture and face turned in rapt attention towards him. There was an unreadable emotion swirling in those bottle green eyes, as he studied his sensei, no doubt analyzing each comment that Shota would make, trying to understand the importance of the situation, especially in relation to himself. Yes, Shota was an idiot. No, my dad wasn't one for things like that. The underground hero continued, somewhat vague in his reply, not wanting to go into too much detail about his background. He wasn't keen to dredge up just yet, especially with a boy that didn't need to understand the issues that he carried. Because they weren't important, at least not to anyone but him. His feelings weren't so important, not as important as this was here and now. And you've seen present Mike, Shota continued with a small wave. He loves fashion and dressing smart. He saw my sloppy attempts in the first day class and made his mission to rectify the situation. Among other things, Shota thought with a flash of fondness for Hisashi's overbearing presence. The man had made it in his personal quest to befriend him when he tried everything in his power to dissuade the excitable voice hero. They were decidedly two very opposite figures, and Hisashi had always known that. Yet he persisted and persisted and persisted. Not that Shota would think to change things now. He'd grown somewhat used to the opposite nature that balanced his own in many ways, helped to temper things just a bit. Oh, came the soft reply as a small, wistful smile wormed its way onto the boy's face. Another flicker of motion striking the bottle green gaze of the boy as he seemed to turn into his thoughts for a second, not seeing his sensei fully as he seemed to consider his own world, his own memories. I'm, uh, glad you had a friend to do that for you. Hesitant green eyes peered into onyx ones as the man observed the boy quietly for a moment, measuring the equal levels of hurt, longing, and adoration shining in the kid's gaze. A measure of vulnerability only apparent to Shota. Here and now, in the quiet of the empty classroom that Midoriya seemed to frequent on his own far more than Shota realized. With still another soft sigh, the man waved his hand towards the boy, frowning half-heartedly at Izuku, who straightened as Shota stood again and moved once more towards the kid's desk, footfalls heavy and purposeful. He wasn't about to startle the kid any more than he had already had today. Given that thing here again, Give that thing here again, problem child, he huffed fondly, placing a heavy hand in the boy's curls, because he understood a little better now. Let's get let's go over this again. And if the problem child didn't quite grasp how to tie his tie and came back the next day to practice some more, well, Shota wasn't too bothered by it. Oh my god, adorable fic. Okay, sorry about me stuttering so much during this. The fic has stutters in it, so I tried to say it stutters, and I even left some of my own stutters by accident because it's hard to tell if I'm stuttering on purpose or stuttering by accident, even to myself. So there's probably more stutters in there than there was originally. But yeah, good news. I am slowly getting permission, trying to get permission for a bunch of fics. Like I said earlier, please send recommendations in that post. Like anything, please. I beg. I absolutely beg. I am still on my mission to find fics. I'm gonna, after this, go back to reading the fic that I am most likely gonna ask permission for. I just want to refinish it because I like double making sure that a fic would work and I would want to do it. So if I can get enjoyment out of a second read or even like a first read enough to want to podfic it, then I'll gladly podfic it. There's some fics that if I don't get permission for, I'm just gonna do a bunch of fan art because I like the fic anyway. I'm weird like that, guys. Anyway, um, I wanted to say thank you for listening to me absolutely struggling to speak. And sorry if my voice kinda is dead. I'm either having an allergy of some kind, like pollen or something, or I'm sick. I'm not sure what it is, but my throat's been really scratchy lately. So you may have heard me sipping tea a few times during this. I do have bloopers. So stay till the end if you want to listen to those. Bye. Agitated speckling was up speculate. Okay, speculate tapped the tie lightly. Okay, well we got a Discord.